Hello and thank you for joining for tonight's stories. I hope you enjoy. The Clearing. The coffee was cold, but I drank it anyway. That's how I knew something was wrong before the first scream. You sure we're even on the right road? Jake leaned over the wheel, squinting at the GPS like it had personally offended him. The screen flickered, no signal, just as the trees closed in around us, their branches scraping the roof of the rental like skeletal fingers. Lee exhaled sharply through her nose. Told you we should have taken the interstate. I didn't answer. My phone had died an hour ago, but not before the last text from Tara's ex pinged through. Don't let her go back there. I deleted it before she could see. Now, watching her chew her thumbnail raw in the rearview, I wondered if that made me the asshole here. The cabin wasn't where the listing promised. We found it 3 miles deep in a clearing that shouldn't have existed, too perfectly circular, the ground packed hard as concrete. No birds, no wind, just the creak of the porch steps underfoot and the smell of wet iron clinging to the air. Marcus was the first to notice the scratches. Not on the doorframe, above it, deep gouges in the wood at a height that would have required something standing at least 8 feet tall. Jake whistled. Bear. Tara's breath hitched. Bears don't climb. We should have left then. But the key was in the lock, the beds were made, and the fireplace still held the ghost of heat from the last guests, or whatever had been here before us. That night I dreamt of running, not the frantic, heart-pounding kind, the slow, underwater kind where your legs won't obey. Something watched from the tree line, its eyes reflecting the moonlight in twin points of jaundiced yellow. When I woke, Lee's side of the bed was empty. I found her at the window, her breath fogging the glass. There's someone out there, she murmured. I didn't ask how she knew. The silhouette between the pines was enough, too tall, too still, its head cocked at an angle that made my vertebrae ache just looking at it. Then, as if sensing us, it stepped forward. Not walked, not crawled. Stepped. Like it had joints where nothing should bend. Jake's laughter from the other room was a gunshot in the silence. You guys see the fucking hatch in here. And just like that, the thing in the trees was gone. Or maybe it was inside now. Waiting. That's what it felt like the cabin itself was holding its breath. The hatch yawned open in the center of the floor, its rusted hinges groaning softly as Jake pried it wider with a crowbar he'd found leaning against the fireplace. The smell hit us first, spoiled meat and damp earth, with something metallic underneath. Tara gagged, pressing her sleeve to her nose. Marcus didn't move. He was staring at the crowbar. That wasn't there before, he said quietly. Lee's flashlight beam trembled as she aimed it into the hole. The light didn't pierce the darkness so much as smear across it, revealing glimpses of what lay below, jagged stone steps, a damp glint of something coiled near the bottom. A backpack. No, two. One with a frayed pink strap. A child S. Jake whooped. Dibs on the haunted loot. His voice echoed back at us a half-second too late, the cadence just slightly off, like the basement had rehearsed his words. I grabbed his arm. Don't. He shook me off, already stepping down. The third stair snapped under his weight with a wet crack. Not wood breaking. Something else. Something that made Tara whimper and Marcus go very still. Then the sound came. Not from below. From behind us. A wet, rhythmic clicking like a tongue working loose teeth. Slow, deliberate, just beyond the cabin door. Jake froze mid-step. His reflection in the blackened basement window showed his face, and something else pressed against the glass behind him. A hand, too long, too many knuckles. Lee's flashlight died. In the dark, Tara's phone buzzed. A text. We all saw it light up the screen. Run. Sent from Jake's number. Jake, who was still standing frozen on the stairs. Jake, whose phone was in his back pocket. Silent. Unlit. The flashlight rolled from Lee's grip as she stumbled back, her elbow cracking against the fireplace mantel. No one spoke. The only sound was Tara's choked whimper and that awful clicking, closer now, punctuated by a slow, wet drag against the cabin's outer wall. Jake turned his head too slowly, like his neck had forgotten how to pivot. His pupils swallowed the whites of his eyes whole. "Guys," he whispered. The word dripped. A fat, black drop of something thick and viscous slid from his nostril and splattered onto the stair. Marcus moved first. He lunged, grabbing Tara's wrist and yanking her toward the door. Lee followed, but I couldn't look away from Jake, from the way his smile split wider than his face should have allowed, teeth gleaming like wet bone in the dim light. His fingers twitched toward the crowbar. The basement window shattered inward. A wrist-thick tendril of flesh shot through the gap, wrapping around Jake's ankle with a sound like raw steak hitting a hot grill. He didn't scream. He giggled, high and reedy, as it yanked him backward into the dark. His head struck the stone steps with a crunch that didn't sound human, didn't sound like it should have stopped. Tara screamed. The thing outside answered. Not with a growl or a snarl, with Jake's voice piped through a throat that wasn't his anymore. Leah, you left me." The cadence was perfect. The wet, bubbling undertone was. Marcus slammed his shoulder into the door. It didn't budge. Something heavy slumped against it from the outside, something that hummed Jake's favorite Metallica riff between wet, clicking breaths. Lee grabbed the fireplace poker. Her hands shook. "Window," she hissed. Glass rained down as we dove through, Tara's sleeve snagging on a shard that tore through fabric and skin alike. She didn't make a sound. Behind us, the cabin's front door groaned inward, hinges screaming. We ran. The trees blurred. My lungs burned. Somewhere behind us, something laughed, a sound like a dying engine trying to mimic joy. Then the forest fell silent. Too silent. No wind, no crickets, just the thud of our footsteps and the creeping certainty that we weren't alone anymore. That we'd never been alone. Tara's phone buzzed again. None of us dared look. But in the quiet, I could hear the message tone. Jake's ringtone. Playing from somewhere ahead of us. In the dark. Where nothing should have been. The ringtone cut off mid-chorus. Tara's breath hitched beside me, her fingers digging into my arm hard enough to leave crescents of pain even through my jacket. Ahead between the pines, a shape detached itself from the shadows, too tall, too thin, its outline warping like heat haze off asphalt. It didn't move toward us. It unfolded, joints popping audibly as it straightened to its full height. Lee's poker clattered to the ground. "That's not," she started, then choked. The thing tilted its head and moonlight glinted off something metallic clutched in its elongated fingers, Jake's phone. The screen lit up, casting a sickly blue glow over the creature's his face, or what was left of it. The jaw hung slack, tendons snapping like overstretched rubber bands with every twitch. His left eye was gone. Something else peered out from the socket. Marcus backed into me, his elbow jabbing my ribs. "Don't blink," he whispered. I didn't ask why. The thing's remaining eye tracked Tara's shuddering exhale with a wet, sticky sound, its pupil dilating unnaturally fast. Then it spoke. Not with Jake's voice this time, with ours. A fractured chorus of Lee's gasp, Marcus's curse, my own thundering pulse, all stitched together into something almost linguistic. The sound skittered down my spine like spider legs. Tara made a small, broken noise. The thing's head snapped toward her, its neck bending at a right angle. Lee moved first. She scooped up the poker and hurled it like a javelin. It struck the creature's chest with a hollow thunk, no blood, just a puff of black dust. The thing looked down, almost bemused, before plucking the poker free with fingers that kept lengthening. Marcus yanked us left toward a cluster of boulders. "The stream," he panted. "It can't cross-run." A wet crunch cut him off. Tara wasn't beside me anymore. She was 6 feet back, suspended midair, the creature's elongated arm buried wrist-deep in her abdomen. Her mouth opened, not to scream but to laugh, a perfect mimicry of Jake's earlier whoop. Blood bubbled over her lips. The thing withdrew its arm with a sound like a boot pulling free of mud, and Tara collapsed. Her phone skittered across the forest floor, screen cracking. The last text glowed in the dirt. "You should have listened." Sent from Marcus's number. Marcus, who was gripping my shoulder. Marcus, whose phone was in his pocket. Silent. Dark. The thing smiled with Tara's teeth. That's what broke me. Not the way her body hit the ground like a sack of wet flour. Not the gurgling, liquid sound of Marcus vomiting beside me. It was the smile, too wide, too knowing, stretching across a face that was already losing its shape, the skin sagging like melted wax. The creature's fingers twitched, bones elongating with a series of pops, and I realized with dizzy horror that it was practicing, mimicking the way Tara's lips had curled just before she. Lee's scream was raw. "Run!" She didn't wait. She bolted, crashing through the underbrush like a spooked deer. Marcus and I followed, but the thing didn't chase us. It watched, its head tilting farther than any spine should allow, tracking our movements with a predator's lazy certainty. The stream was closer than Marcus had said. I heard it before I saw it, the rush of water over rocks, a sound so normal it made my chest ache. Lee was already waist-deep, her arms outstretched. "Hurry." I didn't look back, I couldn't, but I heard it. A wet, slithering drag like something heavy being pulled across dead leaves. Then Marcus gasped, his hand slipping from mine. I turned just in time to see the tendril, thick as a man's thigh, glistening with something that wasn't quite blood, coil around his ankle. It yanked. Marcus hit the ground hard, his fingers scrabbling at roots as the thing reeled him in like a hooked fish. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Just a thin, reedy wheeze as the pressure crushed his ribs. Lee waded back toward us, her hands fluttering uselessly. "Cut it, cut." The knife was in my pocket. Jake's stupid survivalist gift from last Christmas. I fumbled for it, the blade catching moonlight as I saw it at the tendril. It didn't bleed. It split, each new strand writhing with a life of its own, twining around my wrist in a grip like cold iron. Marcus's eyes locked onto mine. "Go," he mouthed. Then his face contorted, not in pain but in recognition. Behind him the trees parted. Something stood there, something with too many limbs and a head that lolled like a broken-necked bird. It wore Jake's clothes. It smiled with Tara's teeth. And it held Marcus's journal in hands that weren't hands at all. The last thing I heard before the world went black was Lee's voice, except it wasn't hers. It was theirs, a chorus of every scream we'd ever swallowed. "You'll love the next part." The voice, if you could call it that, was Lee's pitch layered over Jake's laugh and Tara's hiccuping sob, all woven together with that same wet clicking. My vision swam. The knife slipped from my fingers. Above me, the creature's silhouette blotted out the moon, its limbs unfurling like rotten sails. Then impact. Cold water shocked me back into my body. Lee had tackled us both into the stream, her nails digging into my arm as the current grabbed us. The creature recoiled from the water's edge, its form rippling like a reflection in disturbed oil. Marcus wasn't so lucky. The tendrils retracted with a sound like tearing Velcro, dragging him into the underbrush. His scream cut off with a gurgle. We floated. Seconds or hours time meant nothing. The stream spat us out near a derelict ranger station, its roof sagging like a rotten tooth. Inside, Lee collapsed against the door, her breath coming in ragged hitches. "It learns," she whispered. Moonlight through the broken windows striped her face, making her look decades older. "Did you see? It used the journal. It reads." I wanted to vomit, to scream. Instead, I stared at my trembling hands. Jake's blood crusted under my nails. Outside, the forest held its breath. Then Lee's phone buzzed. We both flinched. The screen lit up her hollow eyes as she read the text aloud, her voice flat. "Almost there. Sent from my number." My phone was in the stream. Lee met my gaze. In the silence we heard it, the creak of the porch steps, the click-click-click of something learning to knock. The door handle rattled. "Let me in," crooned Jake's voice, but the cadence was all wrong, too many syllables, too many throats. Lee's fingers found mine, cold, steady. The lock held. For now. The word echoed in the silence between us like a prayer. Lee's grip tightened around my wrist, cold fingers pressing into my pulse point as if counting the beats. Outside, the knocking stopped mid-rhythm. Something heavy shifted against the doorframe, wood groaning under an impossible weight. I tasted copper. My tongue had split open at some point without me noticing. The ranger station smelled of mildew and the sharp tang of Lee's sweat as she pressed closer, her breath hot against my ear. "Window," she mouthed. Behind us, the only unbroken pane reflected our huddled forms, and the shadow stretching across the ceiling, its edges wavering like smoke. The doorknob turned, not jerked, not rattled, turned with the smooth precision of something that had watched human hands for a very long time. Lee's flashlight rolled off the desk, the beam catching the thing's fingers as they curled around the doorframe. Too many knuckles, too many joints, the skin splitting like overripe fruit to accommodate them. I stopped breathing. The creature inhaled in perfect sync, its ribcage expanding with a wet, papery sound. Then it spoke, and this time the voice wasn't borrowed. It was new, a sound like a dozen corpses sighing in unison. "Almost home," it crooned. The words dripped between us, thick as syrup. The door creaked open an inch. Moonlight sliced through the gap, illuminating the thing's face, or what it had shaped into a face. Jake's left eye floated in a sea of shifting tissue, pupil dilating wildly. Tara's lips peeled back from teeth that kept growing, then receding. Lee moved like a struck match, swift, bright, desperate. Her boot connected with the desk, sending it screeching across the floor to wedge against the door. The impact shook loose Marcus's journal from the creature's grip. Pages fluttered open, and for one frozen second I saw his last entry. "They mimic until they don't have to anymore." The window shattered outward as we dove through, glass slicing through my jeans. We hit the ground running, Lee's arm hooked around my waist as she dragged me toward the tree line. Behind us, the station door exploded inward, not with force but with something worse. Patience. And laughter. Jake's, Tara's, Marcus's, all braided together into a sound that chased us deeper into the pines. Lee's phone buzzed against my thigh. I didn't need to look to know the text would read, "Run faster," sent from Lee's phone, currently clenched in her white-knuckled fist. The forest blurred around us, branches whipping at our faces like skeletal fingers. My lungs burned, my legs screamed. But the worst part wasn't the exhaustion, it was the silence. No footfalls behind us, no cracking twigs, just that god-awful laughter drifting between the trees like it came from everywhere at once. Lee yanked me sideways into a gully, our knees hitting the creek bed with twin cracks. The water was shallow, barely ankle-deep, but she pressed her palm to my mouth before I could speak. The moonlight caught her eyes wide, wild as she pointed upstream. Something moved there, not chasing, waiting. The silhouette stood perfectly still, its head cocked at that impossible angle, arms dangling too long, fingers brushing the water's surface without causing a single ripple. Then it stepped forward and the creek dried up beneath its feet, not evaporated, retreated like the very land recoiled from its presence. Lee's breath hitched. The thing's jaw unhinged with a wet pop and out poured Marcus's voice, smooth as whiskey. "You left the journal." Its tongue too long, too segmented, flicked out to catch a droplet of something dark leaking from its chin. "I like that story." Lee's phone lit up between us. A video played automatically. Tara's last footage from the cabin, the timestamp reading now. The creature on screen wasn't the one in front of us. It wore Marcus's face like a ill-fitting mask, his features sliding around its skull as it crouched over Lee's sleeping form in the ranger station, its fingers tracing her cheekbone with terrifying gentleness. The real creature smiled. It was learning irony. Lee's grip on my arm went slack. Her phone screen changed. A new text from unknown, "See you at home." The creature took another step. The creek bed cracked beneath it, fissures spiderwebbing toward us like veins. I grabbed Lee's wrist. She didn't move. Her pupils were blown wide, her lips parted around a soundless word. The thing inhaled sharply, asterisk her asterisk scent, and its smile widened until its cheeks split. Almost, it whispered, almost, almost. The gunshot shattered the night. The creature's head snapped back, black ichor spraying the pines. Behind us, a flashlight beam cut through the trees. A voice shouted, "Human, real, move your asses." Lee didn't hesitate. She dragged me toward the light, our feet slipping on the cracked creek bed. Behind us, the creature giggled, the sound dripping from its shattered jaw. "New friends," it sighed, right before the second shot tore through its chest. The flashlight wavered, a man's curse. Then, impossibly, Marcus's voice, real Marcus, yelling, "Don't look back." But I did. The bullets hadn't killed it, they'd taught it. Marcus stood silhouetted against the trees, shotgun smoking in his hands, but his eyes were wrong. Too shiny, too pleased. Behind him, the thing we just shot unfolded itself from the creek bed, its body reknitting with a sound like wet rope twisting tight. The bullet holes didn't bleed. They breathed, pulsing in time with the creature's rattling sigh. Lee froze. "No," she whispered, "not fear, recognition." The creature wearing Marcus's skin tilted its head. "You left the journal," it repeated, but this time its voice was Lee's, perfect, flawless. The real Marcus would have stuttered on the J. The armed stranger, a ranger, hunter, swore and fired again. The shot went wide, tearing through pine bark. The creature didn't flinch. It just watched, its pupils contracting to pinpricks as it memorized the recoil, the stance, the way the man's fingers trembled on the trigger. Learning, always learning. Then it moved. Not toward us, toward him. The man screamed once, a short, wet sound before the creature embraced him. Not attacked, embraced. Its arms elongated, wrapping around his torso in a grotesque parody of a lover's hug. The man's back arched, his jaw unhinged. And then, oh God, he melted, his features sliding off his skull like warmed wax, pooling in the creature's waiting palms. The thing sighed content. When it turned back to us, its face was the hunter's. Its smile was Tara's. Lee's fingers found mine. I scolded. "Run," she breathed. We ran. The forest blurred. Branches tore at our clothes. Somewhere behind us, the creature sang, a mangled rendition of Jake's favorite road trip song, each note warped by too many throats. The trees thinned abruptly and we stumbled into another clearing, not circular like the first, hexagonal. At its center stood a waist-high stone, its surface carved with symbols that hurt to look at. Lee made a wounded noise. "It's a marker," she said. Her voice sounded distant, like she was speaking through water. "They're marking territory." The singing stopped. Behind us, leaves crunched, not the erratic thrashing of pursuit, the slow, deliberate steps of something that knew it had already won. Lee's hand tightened around mine. "Close your eyes," she whispered. I did. The last thing I heard was the creature's sigh, happy, human, right before its fingers brushed my neck. Then nothing. Just the wind through the pines. And beneath it, faint as a dying radio signal, "Welcome home." I woke with my face pressed into damp earth, the stench of rotten leaves thick in my nose. My fingers curled, not into dirt but paper. Marcus's journal, its pages intact despite the creek water soaking through my clothes. The last entry shimmered under moonlight. They don't just mimic, they remember. Lee's scream tore through the silence. I lurched upright, disoriented. The clearing was empty. No stone, no symbols, just Lee kneeling 10 feet away, her hands clamped over her ears as the creature crouched before her, asterisk wearing me, asterisk. My face, my clothes, my voice as it whispered, "You left the journal," with perfect cadence. Its head snapped toward me. My own eyes stared back, pupils blown black. "Almost," it sighed, and its jaw unhinged, tongue unfurling like a slug toward Lee's trembling fingers. The journal burned in my grip. I flung it not at the creature but at Lee. Pages fluttered open midair, revealing sketches none of us had made. The cabin's hatch, the ranger station, this clearing, each labeled in Marcus's handwriting with dates stretching back decades. The creature hissed. Lee caught the journal, her breath hitching as she understood. "It's a loop," she rasped. The thing wearing my skin twitched. A flicker of uncertainty crossed its stolen face, our face, before its limbs spasmed violently. Bones popped. Skin split. It writhed, its form destabilizing as Lee tore a page free and pressed it to the creature's chest. The symbols ignited. Not fire, recognition. The thing shrieked, its stolen features melting like wax as the forest itself seemed to inhale, pulling its essence backward into the trees. Lee grabbed my arm. "Run now." We stumbled into the pines, the journal clutched between us like a talisman. Behind us, the clearing pulsed, once, twice, before collapsing inward with a sound like 1,000 doors slamming shut. Dawn bled through the branches. The road emerged like a mirage, asphalt shimmering with dew. A lone car idled at the shoulder, its headlights cutting through the mist. Lee's fingers dug into my wrist. "Don't." The driver's door creaked open. A boot hit the gravel. Then Jake's voice, frayed with static. "You left me here." The journal's final page fluttered to the ground, empty, waiting. Lee met my gaze. Her lips shaped the word before the engine gunned. Again. The headlights swept over us and I saw the driver's face. Not Jake's, not even a face at all. Just a gaping hole where features should be, the edges of its skull flexing like wet leather. The journal at our feet trembled, its pages flipping wildly as the car lurched forward. We broke left as tires screamed on asphalt, the vehicle fishtailing into the trees where the clearing had been. The journal's pages stopped flipping. The last entry, Marcus's but not his handwriting, glowed faintly. The loop closes when you stop running. Lee kicked the journal into the road. It burst into blue flame, the fire licking upward in perfect spirals. The car's engine stuttered. The thing in the driver's seat wailed, a sound that shook the pines. Then silence. Dawn hardened around us. Birdsong returned, first tentative, then deafening. The road stretched empty in both directions. Lee exhaled shakily. "It's over." Her phone buzzed. We both stared at the screen. A single notification from a deleted contacts list. "Missed call, Jake, 3:16 a.m. The timestamp was yesterday's date. Lee's thumb hovered over the voicemail icon. I knocked the phone from her hand. It shattered against the asphalt. The screen flickered once, calling, before dying. A breeze stirred the ashes of the journal. The pages had burned, but the symbols remained, seared into the road in oily black strokes. They pulsed once, faded. Lee's fingers found mine, warm this time. "Home," she whispered. I looked back at the trees. Something moved there, not a creature, not a shadow, just branches swaying in a wind that didn't touch the grass. "Yeah," I lied. The first raindrop hit as we turned our backs on the woods. It tasted like copper and creek water, like something old waking up. Behind us, gravel crunched. Neither of us turned around. The crunching stopped just beyond the tree line. Rain pattered against the asphalt, washing away the last of the journal's ashes, except for one stubborn scrap clinging to my boot. Lee's breath fogged the air as she stared at it, her face pale. "That's not paper," she whispered. I bent down. The scrap was leathery, veined. A piece of skin, tattooed with symbols that squirmed under the rainwater. It disintegrated as I touched it, leaving only a smear of black ink across my fingertips that stank of spoiled meat. A car horn blasted behind us. We whirled not toward the woods but the road. An actual car idled there, wipers slapping rhythmically. The driver's window rolled down. A middle-aged woman peered out, eyebrows raised. "You kids need a ride or just really love pneumonia." Lee's laugh cracked like ice. "Ride, please." The woman nodded toward the backseat. As we slid in, I caught her glancing at the rearview mirror, not at us but at the woods. Her knuckles whitened on the wheel. "Where to?" Lee rattled off her address. The woman's eyes flicked to me. "Same," I lied. The engine growled as we pulled away. Rain blurred the windows, but not enough to miss the shape standing at the tree line. Tall, too thin, one arm raised in a wave that wasn't quite human. The woman's foot slammed the accelerator. "Seat belts," she said, too lightly. The downpour vanished the second we crossed the rusted Blackburn County sign. One moment the windshield was a churning river, the next dry as bone. The radio hissed, then Marcus's voice filled the car, calm as I'd never heard him. "They don't mimic. They assimilate. Every scream, every sob fuel for the next performance." Static screeched. The woman swore, stabbing at the radio buttons. It kept playing. "The loop resets when the journal burns," Marcus continued, but his words slurred now, like his mouth was full of liquid. "Unless—" The transmission cut with a wet pop. The dashboard clock flashed 3:16 a.m., though dawn painted the sky pink. Lee's fingers dug into my thigh. The woman's eyes darted to the rearview again, not checking traffic, watching us. Her fingers tapped the wheel in a rhythm that matched Jake's old ringtone. "Almost there," she murmured. The car smelled suddenly of wet earth and copper. I caught Lee's wide-eyed stare. The woman's reflection in the side mirror, no pupils, just blackness swimming where eyes should be. The turn signal clicked, right, toward the interstate, away from Lee's neighborhood. Lee's scream died as the locks thunked down. The woman hummed now tuneless, the sound vibrating through the seats. My phone buzzed, a text from Lee's number. "DONT look at her hands." Too late. Her fingers on the wheel weren't fingers at all. Too many joints. Too familiar. The skin peeled back as she adjusted her grip, revealing the same world symbols from the journal's last page. The radio sputtered back to life. Marcus's voice garbled. "Get out before she—" Tires squealed as Lee yanked the emergency brake. The car fishtailed, slamming into a ditch. The woman, the thing shrieked, its face splitting vertically as Lee drove her elbow into its throat. We tumbled into daylight asphalt, scraping our palms. The car door slammed behind us, not by wind, by force. The engine revved. The thing inside laughed with the woman's voice layered over Jake's, over Tara's, over. Lee dragged me toward a gas station's neon glow. Behind us, the car idled, its headlights flickering in Morse code. "Run, run, run." The pumps were rusted. The air reeked of gasoline and something older. A payphone rang. Lee answered. Static, then clear as church bells. "You forgot the journal." The car's engine roared to life. The whispering dark. "Graves, you look like shit." Vic tossed a crumpled energy drink across the ranger station desk, the can skidding to a stop against Daniel's field guide. I caught it mid-roll without looking up from the map. "And you smell like gun oil and bad decisions." He popped the tab, took a swig, and grimaced. "Christ, tastes like battery acid." Elias Carter leaned against the station's corkboard, picking at the frayed edge of a missing person poster. The kid had that fresh-out-of-the-academy look, two clean boots, a crease in his uniform pants sharp enough to cut paper. "So we're just supposed to waltz into the woods after all this?" He gestured at the board, where half a dozen faces stared back under the word "missing" in block letters. "No offense, sir, but this feels like walking into a goddamn horror movie." Mara Ruiz didn't glance up from her rifle cleaning kit. "You watch too many movies, Rook." She snapped the bolt back into place with a practiced flick of her wrist. "Real monsters don't need jump scares. They just take you." I didn't answer Elias right away. Instead, I reached into my desk drawer and slid a manila folder across the scratched laminate surface. It landed with a soft thwap beside Vic's half-empty energy drink. Inside were 6 grainy photos, trail cam stills, the timestamp on each showing between 2:13 a.m. and 2:17 a.m. exactly 2 weeks ago. All showed the same stretch of the Devil's Maw trailhead. All showed nothing at all until the final frame, where something tall and wrong-shouldered blurred past the infrared sensor, so fast it left afterimages like smeared grease paint. Jake Torres was the last to arrive, sliding into the ranger station with his usual half-smirk and a thermos of something that smelled suspiciously like spiked coffee. He tossed a crumpled bag of trail mix at Elias, who fumbled the catch. "Eat up, kid. Last meal and all that." His grin didn't reach his eyes. "Dr. Lillian Poe, just call me Lil. No one's impressed by the PhD out here." She leaned over the map spread across the desk, her braids swinging like a pendulum. She traced a fingertip along the contour lines marking Devil's Maw Canyon. "See this?" The nail was bitten down to the quick. "These disappearances cluster within a 2-mile radius of the canyon's eastern ridge, like something's corralling them." The overhead bulb flickered once, twice, before steadying as Elias exhaled sharply through his nose. "Okay, but what exactly is corralling them?" His fingers tapped a nervous staccato against his thigh. "Bears don't leave boot prints that change mid-stride from size 9 to..." He flipped open the folder again, squinting at the forensics report. "Whatever the hell this is." Vic leaned back in his chair until the plastic groaned. "Kid S got a point." He scratched at the stubble along his jaw. "I've seen predator behavior in the stand. This ain't it. Things that hunt for food don't arrange femurs in goddamn spiral patterns." The station's clock ticked louder than it had any right to. Elia's fingers stilled against his thigh, his breath shallow. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the loose pane of glass above the corkboard. The missing posters fluttered like uneasy ghosts. Jake unscrewed his thermos, the scent of bourbon-laced coffee thick in the sudden silence. "Spiral patterns, huh?" He took a slow sip, eyes flicking to Dr. Poe. "You're the critter expert. What's the play here, Wendigo, Skinwalker? Or are we dealing with some government lab experiment that got real loose?" Dr. Poe exhaled through her nose, the sound sharp as a snapped twig. "Don't be an idiot, Torres. Wendigo psychosis requires starvation. This park's got enough deer to feed an army." Her finger jabbed at a blurred section of the forensics photo. "But this..." The nail, bitten raw, tapped the strange, elongated print. "Tell me how starvation explains that." I folded the map with deliberate slowness, creasing the paper along Devil's Maw's eastern ridge. The movement made Elias jump. "We're not here to theorize, we're here to verify." The map went into my pack with a rustle louder than necessary. "Gear up, wheels roll in 10. The tires of the Park Service truck crunched over gravel as we pulled into the Devil's Maw trailhead parking lot, empty, except for a single, weather-beaten sedan with its doors left ajar. Vic killed the engine, and the sudden silence pressed against my eardrums like a physical weight. Elias was the first out, his boots scuffing against the asphalt as he craned his neck to scan the tree line. "No birds," he muttered. Mara nodded beside him, her fingers flexing once around her rifle strap. She didn't need to say it. The absence of sound was louder than any alarm. Even the wind had died. The sedan's interior smelled like stale sweat and something metallic. Vic kicked the driver's door wider with his boot, revealing a spilled coffee cup still dripping onto the floor mat. The liquid was too dark, too viscous, not coffee at all. "That's recent," he murmured, crouching to swipe a finger through it. He held it up to the light, the red smeared across his glove unmistakable. Dr. Poe moved past him without a word, her boots silent on the asphalt. She paused at the tree line, her braid gone unnervingly still. "Over here." Her voice was flat, like she'd already detached from whatever she was about to show us. Nestled in the underbrush was a backpack, its contents neatly arranged. A water bottle, a granola bar still in its wrapper, a pocket knife with the blade extended. All placed with deliberate precision, as if waiting for its owner to return. The knife gleamed in the thin morning light, its edge pristine. No blood, no signs of struggle, just stillness, too much stillness. Elias shifted his weight beside me, his breath coming too fast. "That's Mark Riva's pack," he said, pointing to the embroidered Park Service logo. He was on patrol last week. They found his truck, but his voice hitched. Mara didn't wait for permission. She stepped past Dr. Poe, her rifle slung low but ready, and crouched by the pack. Her fingers hovered over the items, not touching. "Blades clean," she muttered. "No prints either, wiped." She tilted her head, studying the way the granola bar was placed, dead center on top of the water bottle, aligned with military precision. "This isn't a drop site, it's a display." Vic exhaled sharply through his nose and straightened, scanning the trees. His hand rested on the grip of his sidearm, his knuckles pale. "Whatever did this is watching us right now," he said, too calm. "Guaranteed." A twig snapped somewhere to our left. All 6 of us turned as one, but there was nothing, just the sway of branches in a wind that shouldn't have been there. The air was dead. Jake's thermos slipped from his fingers, hitting the dirt with a dull thud. Coffee seeped into the earth like old blood. The coffee pooled black and glossy between Jake's boots, reflecting the sky in a distorted mirror. No one moved to pick it up. Dr. Poe's fingers twitched toward her field notebook but stopped halfway, as if afraid the sound of pen on paper might trigger something. Mara broke the silence first. "We're being herded." She didn't whisper, her voice carried, deliberate. "Look at the tree line." She jerked her chin toward the pines. The underbrush was trampled in a perfect semicircle around us, branches bent outward like something had pushed through from inside. The pattern wasn't random. It funneled us toward the trailhead leading deeper into Devil's Maw. Vic's boot nudged the thermos. "Herded implies it wants us alive." The coffee had already stopped steaming. Elia's hand hovered near his sidearm. "So what's the move, boss?" His voice cracked on the last word. I didn't blame him. The sedan's open door swung lazily on its hinges with a creak too loud for the windless air. The creak of the car door settled into silence. I exhaled through my nose, counting the seconds between breaths, 3 in, 4 out, like they taught us in survival training. The muscles between my shoulder blades tightened, a primal itch warning of eyes on my back. Jake bent to retrieve his thermos, fingers brushing the damp earth. His thumb came away smeared with coffee grounds and something darker, sticky between his fingerprints. He wiped it on his pants without comment. Dr. Poe crouched beside Mara, her braids slipping over one shoulder as she examined the arranged backpack. "This isn't just a display," she murmured, gloved fingers hovering over the pocket knife. "It's instructional." She tilted her head, studying the angle of the blade. "See how it's positioned, edge outward, pointing northeast, toward the canyon." Vic shifted his weight, boots crunching gravel. "So it's inviting us in." His voice was dry as gunpowder. Jake unscrewed his thermos cap with a too casual twist of his wrist, but his knuckles were white. "Invitation or trap?" He took a swig, throat working hard. "Because I gotta say, I'm not feeling real welcome right now." The trees rustled again, no wind, just movement. Too many movements in too many directions. Elia's hand twitched toward his sidearm, then away, like he couldn't decide which was more dangerous, drawing attention or being unarmed. His breathing hitched. "Sir." "Quiet." My voice came out lower than I intended. The forest had that pre-dawn hush, the kind that makes you feel like you're the last people on Earth. I motioned toward the trailhead with 2 fingers, "Move out," and didn't wait to see if they followed. Mara took point without discussion, her rifle stock pressed tight to her shoulder. She stepped over the backpack like it was a tripwire, her boots finding silent purchase on the pine needles. Dr. Poe fell in behind her, snapping her field notebook shut with a click that made Elia's flinch. The trail narrowed into a throat of rock, the canyon walls leaning closer with every step. Shadows pooled in the crevices like spilled ink, too deep for the midday sun to touch. Mara's boot scuffed a stone. The sound skittered ahead of us, bouncing off the cliffs in a way that shouldn't have been possible, too many echoes, overlapping like whispers. Dr. Poe stopped so suddenly Vic nearly walked into her. "Look," she pointed at the ground. The dirt was scuffed in erratic arcs, but what made my pulse stutter were the prints embedded between them. Human at first, then, 3 steps later, elongated, the toes splayed into something that wasn't quite claw or foot. The transition was seamless, as if whatever made them had changed mid-stride. Jake crouched, his thermos forgotten at his hip. "That's not," his voice cracked. "That's not a costume." His fingers hovered over the last print, the one that dug deep enough to show the faint impression of scales. A branch snapped overhead. We all looked up. Nothing. Just the sway of pine boughs in air that hadn't moved since we entered the canyon. Elia's breath came fast beside me, his fingers flexing around his rifle strap. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. The branch snapped again, sharp, deliberate, and this time something moved in the canopy. A shadow too large for a bird, too fluid for a squirrel. Mara's rifle snapped up, her breathing steady, but her finger hovered over the trigger guard. "Don't," she murmured, though no one had raised a weapon. "It wants the reaction." Jake's thermos slipped from his fingers again, hitting the dirt with a dull thunk. Coffee seeped into the earth, this time near the elongated footprint. The liquid pooled black against the dirt, then, impossibly, began to steam as if the ground itself was boiling. Dr. Poe took a half-step back, her boot crushing a pinecone. The sound was obscenely loud. "That's not possible," she whispered, but the steam curled toward her like a living thing. Elias made a choked noise, his rifle stock pressed tight against his shoulder. His hands shook. "Sir." Vic cut him off with a sharp gesture. His other hand rested on his sidearm, but he didn't draw. "Eyes up," he muttered. "It's fucking with us." His gaze never left the trees, scanning the branches with the methodical precision of a man who'd walked into enough ambushes to know the shape of one. The steam twisted upward in thin, sinuous tendrils, forming shapes that dissolved before anyone could name them. Dr. Poe's breath hitched as she reached for her field notebook, her fingers trembling just enough to betray her calm. "That's not geothermal," she said, voice low. "The ground's cold. This is." The steam pulsed, mimicking her exhale. My hand twitched toward my belt knife, but I forced it still. "Keep moving," I ordered, voice tight. "Single file, Mara rear guard, eyes on everything." The steam dissipated as they edged past it, the unnatural heat fading into the chill air like it had never been. Jake's boot scuffed a rock, and the sound echoed weirdly off the canyon walls, first one scrape, then a dozen, overlapping like whispers in a crowded room. Dr. Poe's pen hovered over her notebook. She didn't write. "The acoustics are wrong," she murmured. "Sound shouldn't refract like that without." A twig snapped ahead, too precise, too centered. Everyone froze. Vic's jaw clenched, his fingers flexing near his holster. The silence stretched, thick as the sweat on Elia's temple. Then from nowhere, a child's giggle, high, clear, and utterly out of place in the deepening twilight. The giggle cut off abruptly, leaving behind a silence so complete it pressed against their eardrums. Elia's breath came in shallow hitches, his rifle's barrel twitching toward the sound. "What the fuck?" he whispered, and the forest swallowed the words whole. Mara's grip tightened on her rifle, her knuckles pale. "No kid's been missing in these reports," she said, too calm. "That's new." The child's giggle echoed again, closer this time, just beyond the next bend in the trail. My gut twisted. I'd heard that sound before, years ago, in a village where the insurgents used recorded laughter to lure patrols into kill zones. My fingers tapped once against my thigh, a silent signal, hold position. Mara shifted imperceptibly, her rifle angled toward the noise. Dr. Poe's notebook slipped from her grasp, landing soundlessly in the moss. The giggle came a third time, right beside Dr. Poe's ear. She recoiled, her elbow knocking against Jake's thermos still lying in the dirt. It rolled once, then stopped, as if caught by an invisible hand. The air smelled suddenly of wet earth and something older, something with too many teeth. Vic moved before I could signal, stepping forward with his sidearm drawn but low. "Show yourself," he growled. The trees shivered in response, though there was no wind. A single pinecone dropped from the canopy, bouncing off his shoulder before hitting the ground with a hollow tock. The pinecone rolled toward Vic's boot, then stopped, not like an object settling but as if it had been placed there. A wet, clicking noise skittered through the underbrush, like bone against bone. Dr. Poe's hand shot out, gripping my forearm with fingers gone cold. "Daniel," she breathed. "The tracks." I followed her gaze. The elongated footprint near Jake's thermos was no longer alone. A line of them led away from us, deeper into the canyon. But they weren't footprints anymore. They were grooves, carved into the earth as if by something dragging itself forward on all fours. The grooves deepened as they went, the soil torn up in ragged clumps. Vic's boot hovered over the nearest groove, his weight shifting like he wanted to crush the mark into oblivion. "That's not a goddamn animal," he muttered. The clicking sound repeated, this time from 3 directions at once, left, right, and directly above us in the branches. Jake's head jerked upward, his neck tendons standing rigid. The canopy was empty. Mara exhaled through her nose, her rifle's barrel tracing slow arcs between the sound sources. "It's triangulating," she said, too quiet. Her eyes flicked to me. "Hunters do this," that look said. "Pack tactics." Dr. Poe crouched suddenly, her fingers brushing the torn earth. She recoiled instantly, wiping her hand on her pants like she'd touched something slick. "The soil's cold," she whispered. "Colder than the air. That's—" A twig snapped behind her. Not the dry crack of breaking wood, but the wet pop of cartilage separating. Elias spun toward the sound, his rifle stock slamming into his shoulder with a harsh thud. The giggle erupted again, not from the trees this time, but from his own throat. His eyes widened in horror, his mouth slack as the sound bubbled out of him unbidden. Vic lunged, clapping a hand over Elias' mouth. The giggle squelched into a muffled whimper. Vic's hand muffled the last of Elias' unnatural giggles, but the sound had already done its damage. The team's cohesion frayed at the edges. Mara's rifle barrel dipped for half a second, her attention split between the tree line and Elias' heaving shoulders. Dr. Poe's fingers dug into my arm hard enough to bruise. "It's mimicking," she whispered, her breath frosting in the sudden chill. "Like a mockingbird, but—" The clicking noise cut her off, closer now, synchronized from 3 points into a single, pulsing rhythm. Jake's boot scuffed backward, kicking up a spray of pine needles. His head swiveled toward a rustle in the bushes, just as a child's voice called his name from the opposite direction, perfectly mimicking Mara's inflection. "Jake," it cooed, "you forgot your thermos." The thermos lay between us, its dented metal reflecting the fading light. A thin tendril of steam curled from its mouth, though the coffee had long gone cold. Elias gagged against Vic's palm, his nostrils flaring at a scent none of us could place. The grooves in the soil ahead deepened abruptly, the earth crumbling inward as if something heavy had passed through. I broke the paralysis first. "Move," I snapped, yanking Dr. Poe upright. "Tight circle, now." The team coalesced like muscle memory, backs pressed together in a ring. Mara's elbow brushed mine, her rifle now steady against her cheek. The clicking stuttered, then doubled in tempo, a staccato tick-tick-tick that set my molars vibrating. The clicking stopped. For 3 heartbeats there was only the sound of our breathing, too loud, too ragged. Then the child's voice giggled again, this time from inside our circle. Elias jerked like he'd been shocked, his shoulder knocking into Jake, who stumbled forward, right over the grooves in the dirt. The earth gave way beneath him with a wet schluck, swallowing his boot to the ankle. He yelped, yanking his leg back, but the ground held fast like tar. "Don't pull," Dr. Poe hissed, dropping to her knees beside him. Her fingers hovered over his trapped leg, not touching. "It's not mud. It's—" The soil around Jake's boot pulsed, undulating in a way dirt shouldn't. A glistening strand of something dark and fibrous stretched between his sole and the earth, snapping taut when he tried to shift. Vic swore, holstering his sidearm to grip Jake under the arms. "On 3, he muttered. The child's voice sighed right beside his ear, one, in perfect unison. Vic recoiled, losing his grip. Jake wobbled, his free foot skidding. The fibrous strands multiplied, creeping up his calf like roots seeking water. Mara's rifle barked once, the shot whipping past Jake's thigh to punch into the ground. The earth shrieked. Not a metaphor, a high, ululating wail that sent pine needles raining down on us. The strands retracted instantly, recoiling into the soil. Jake collapsed backward into Vic, his liberated boot dripping with a mucus-like fluid that sizzled where it hit the dirt. Jake's breath came in ragged bursts as he scrambled back, his boot smoking slightly where the fluid ate at the leather. The forest around us had gone preternaturally still, even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Dr. Poe's hands fluttered over Jake's ankle, her gloves smeared with the sizzling residue. "It's enzymatic," she whispered, "like a digestive." A branch cracked overhead, not the sharp snap of earlier, but a slow, splintering groan, the sound of something weighty settling in the canopy. Mara's rifle jerked upward, but the trees were a tangled void against the darkening sky. Shadows pooled unnaturally between the branches, too deep, too liquid. Vic hauled Jake upright with a grunt. "Formation," he barked, but his voice lacked its usual steel. Elias had gone statue, still beside him, his rifle clutched white-knuckled. His lips moved soundlessly, forming words that never left his throat. The child's giggle rippled through the underbrush again, this time layered with wet, clicking undertones, as if whatever mimicked us had grown bored of the charade. The ground trembled, not an earthquake's lurch but a localized shudder centered on the disturbed patch where Jake had been trapped. Pine cones rolled toward the spot like iron filings to a magnet. Dr. Poe's head snapped up. "Move!" she screamed, yanking Jake backward. The team lurched backward as one, boots skidding in the loose soil. The trembling earth split open with a sound like tearing flesh, exhaling a gust of air that reeked of spoiled meat and damp fur. Something glistening writhed in the fissure, not roots, not worms, but tendrils of something that pulsed with a rhythm too close to a heartbeat. Elias fired, not a controlled shot but a panicked burst that sent bark exploding off a nearby pine. The gunfire seemed to snap the forest awake. The canopy erupted with movement, not birds taking flight but shadows detaching from branches, too many limbs unfolding in jerky, insectal grace. Mara's rifle barked twice, her shots precise even as her voice cracked. "Daniel, orders." I grabbed Dr. Poe's packstrap, hauling her behind a boulder as the first shadow hit the ground. It landed wrong, knees bending backward, fingers splayed like a spider testing its web. Vic's sidearm boomed 3 times, the muzzle flash illuminating the thing's face for a fraction of a second. Elongated jaw, too many teeth, eyes that reflected the light like a cat's but with pupils slit sideways. The creature shrieked, a sound that vibrated in my molars. It scuttled sideways, its movements all wrong, joints bending in directions they shouldn't. Jake fumbled with his radio, his fingers slick with sweat. "Base, we've got," Static shrieked back. Then a voice that wasn't human, wasn't even a voice, just wet clicks stitched together into a grotesque parody of speech. The radio screeched again, this time in perfect mimicry of Jake's own panicked breathing. He flung it away like a live grenade. It hit a tree trunk and shattered, the pieces still emitting that awful, wet clicking. Vic's next shot went wide as the creature lunged, its elongated fingers scraping his vest. He pivoted, driving his elbow into its throat, or where a throat should have been. The thing giggled, the sound bubbling up from somewhere deep in its chest. Mara's rifle barked, and the creature's shoulder exploded in a spray of black ichor. It didn't scream. It laughed. Elias was hyperventilating now, his rifle slack in his hands. "It's not real," he whispered. "Can't be real." Dr. Poe slapped him, hard. The crack of her palm against his cheek snapped his head sideways. "Focus asterisk," she hissed. Elias blinked, his breath hitching, but his grip on the rifle tightened. The laughter echoed, not just from the creature before us, but from the trees, the ground, the very air itself, layering into a cacophony that made my skull ache. Vic's boot connected with the thing's ribcage, sending it skittering backward into the underbrush with a sound like a sack of wet gravel. Mara's rifle tracked its movement, but the canopy rustled again. More shadows detached, 3, 4, impossible to count as they flowed between the branches with that same wrong-limbed grace. Jake's hands trembled around his backup pistol. "They're hurting us," he muttered, toward the fissure. He was right. The creatures weren't attacking outright, just pressing inward, forcing our circle tighter. The fissure behind us exhaled another wave of that spoiled meat stench, the pulsing tendrils within stretching toward our boots like plants seeking sunlight. The fissure exhaled again, this time with a sound like a wet tongue peeling off glass. The tendrils inside writhed, stretching toward Jake's still-smoking boot. Mara pivoted, her rifle stock slamming into the nearest creature's clavicle with a crunch that sent it skittering back, but two more took its place. Their limbs clicked as they moved, joints bending at impossible angles. Dr. Poe's glove snagged my sleeve. "The trees," she breathed. I followed her gaze. The pine trunks surrounding us were weeping, not sap but something darker, viscous. It dripped into the grooves in the soil, sizzling where it met the fibrous strands. The ground itself was alive. Vic ejected his magazine with a practiced flick, slamming in a fresh one. "Daniel," he growled, "we're fucking bait." His shot punctuated the sentence, punching through a creature's knee. It collapsed, laughing through needle teeth. The radio pieces near the tree trunk crackled to life, the static resolving into a distorted version of my voice. "Leader, come play." Elias made a sound like a gutted animal. His rifle clattered to the ground as he clawed at his ears. Elias' scream drowned out the radio's mimicry, raw and unhinged. He staggered back, his heel catching on a root, and the ground moved. Tendrils erupted from the soil, wrapping his ankle with a sound like wet rope tightening. Mara's rifle barked twice, severing the strands in a spray of black fluid, but more surged up instantly, coiling around his thigh. Vic lunged, combat knife flashing. The blade sank into the fibrous mass with a squelch. The earth shuddered, and for a heartbeat the tendrils recoiled, just enough for Elias to wrench free, his pants leg smoking where the fluid ate through fabric. The creatures in the trees laughed in unison, a sound like broken glass in a blender. One dropped from the branches, landing between Jake and Dr. Poe with a wet thud. Its two long fingers brushed Poe's sleeve before she jerked away, but the contact left a streak of glistening residue that immediately began eating through her jacket. I fired 3 rounds into the thing's chest. It staggered, ichor bubbling from the wounds, then grinned. The holes knit shut with a sound like Velcro tearing. The creature's grin split wider, jaw unhinging like a snake's to reveal a second set of teeth behind the first, needle-thin and vibrating with that same awful clicking. Dr. Poe backpedaled, her sleeve dissolving into threads as the residue spread. Jake grabbed her by the backpack, yanking her behind him just as Vic's combat knife flashed again, this time across the thing's throat. Black ichor sprayed in an arc, sizzling where it hit the pine needles. The creature clutched at its neck, gurgling, but the laughter didn't stop. It seeped from the trees themselves now, harmonizing with the radio static still spitting from the shattered pieces. Mara's voice cut through the cacophony, sharp as her rifle's report. "Daniel, cover!" She didn't wait for acknowledgement, already dragging Elias toward a cluster of boulders. His face was bloodless, eyes darting between the fissure and the advancing creatures. His lips formed a single word: Skinwalkers. The ground lurched. The fissure yawned wider, tendrils whipping out like tongues tasting the air. One lashed around Vic's wrist before he could dodge, yanking him off balance. His boots skidded in the dirt, carving furrows as the earth tried to swallow him whole. Jake lunged, grabbing Vic's belt with one hand and firing his pistol blindly with the other. A creature's head snapped back, ichor geysering, but 3 more scuttled forward to take its place, their movements syncopated, coordinated. Dr. Poe's glove slapped against my arm, her fingers trembling. "The residue, it's alkaline," she shouted over the shrieking wind that hadn't existed seconds ago. "Vinegar, citrus, anything acidic." Her words dissolved into a cough as the spoiled meat stench thickened. Vic's knife hand spasmed as the tendril around his wrist contracted, veins bulging against the slick black fibers. He roared, not in pain but in raw fury, and jammed the blade into the fisher's edge. The ground howled. The tendrils recoiled, writhing like burned fingers, and Vic twisted free, rolling toward Jake with his wrist dripping something that wasn't blood. Acid? Jake fumbled for his canteen, sloshing liquid onto Vic's arm. The residue hissed, bubbling away to reveal raw, weeping flesh beneath. Vic didn't flinch. His gaze locked onto the fisher as it pulsed, tendrils retreating momentarily, regrouping. Mara's rifle cracked again, dropping a creature mid-leap. Its body hit the dirt and melted, dissolving into the soil like sugar in water. Elia's, now pressed against the boulder, retched violently. "They're not real," he whispered. "Can't be." Dr. Poe tore open her pack, scattering vials. One shattered against a pine trunk, releasing a sharp citrus reek. The bark screamed, peeling back in blackened curls. The creatures hesitated, their clicking syncopation stuttering. The citrus scent cut through the spoiled meat stench like a scalpel. The creatures recoiled, their clicking laughter dissolving into guttural hisses. One scuttled backward into a patch of sunlight, and for the first time we saw it clearly. Not fur, not skin, but something between, shifting like oil on water. Its two long fingers curled protectively over its chest where the scent hit hardest. Vic didn't hesitate. He snatched a vial from Dr. Poe's pack and hurled it at the nearest creature. The glass shattered against its collarbone, releasing a burst of lemon-sour vapor. The thing shrieked, a sound that split the air like a chainsaw through bone. Its chest cavity collapsed inward, ribs folding like wet cardboard. Black ichor sprayed in an arc, sizzling where it hit the ground. Jake was already moving, dumping his canteen's contents onto his knife blade. The liquid, some electrolyte mix that smelled faintly of lime, dripped onto the fisher's edge. The tendrils convulsed, retracting with a wet slurp. The ground itself seemed to whimper. Mara's rifle didn't stop. 3 precise shots, each targeting a creature's path toward the citrus-soaked soil. One took a round through the knee, its leg buckling sideways at a nauseating angle. It crawled forward anyway, fingers digging grooves into the earth. Its jaw unhinged, vomiting a stream of that same black fluid toward Jake's boots. Jake yanked his foot back just in time, the black fluid splattering where his boot had been. The ground hissed and spat like a frying pan. "They're adapting," he muttered, wiping lime-drenched fingers on his pants. The creatures recoiled from the scent, but their movements were less frantic now, more calculated, like predators learning the shape of a new weapon. Dr. Poe fumbled with another vial, her gloves slippery with residue. "Concentrated acetic acid," she panted, tossing it to Mara. The tracker caught it mid-stride, her rifle slung across her back as she sprinted toward the fisher. The largest creature, the one with the sideways pupils, lunged, but Vic intercepted it with a tackle that would have floored a grizzly. They hit the dirt in a tangle of limbs, Vic's knife flashing even as the thing's fingers curled around his throat, squeezing with impossible strength. Mara didn't pause. She jammed the vial into the fisher's pulsing maw and stomped it hard with her boot. Glass crunched. The earth shrieked. Tendrils lashed like dying snakes, ichor geysering upward in a foul arc. The fisher shuddered, then collapsed inward with a sound like 1,000 bones snapping at once. The creatures froze, all of them. Even the one throttling Vic went rigid, its head cocking at an unnatural angle to stare at the ruined fisher. Its grip slackened just enough for Vic to wrench free, gasping. His neck bore 5 perfect puncture wounds, oozing something too dark to be blood. The silence that followed was worse than the laughter. The creatures stood frozen, their too many joints locked mid-movement, heads tilted in unison toward the collapsed fisher. Then, as if pulled by invisible strings, they all turned to face us. Their eyes, those sideways, reflective slits, blinked in perfect sync. Vic staggered to his feet, his knife hand trembling. The puncture wounds on his neck pulsed black at the edges. "They're not attacking," he rasped. "Why aren't they?" The radio pieces crackled again. This time it wasn't mimicry, just static stretched thin into something that almost resembled words. Dr. Poe went pale. "They're communicating," she whispered. The largest creature took a step forward. Its jaw unhinged, but instead of clicking or laughing, it exhaled a sound like wind through a hollow log, a single, reverberating note that made the pine needles shiver. The others echoed it, their voices layering into a dissonant chord that vibrated in my ribcage. The chord faded into silence, leaving only the sound of our ragged breathing and the slow drip of ichor from the trees. The creatures didn't advance, just stood there, heads cocked as if waiting. Dr. Poe's fingers twitched toward her remaining vials. "They're not hunting," she murmured. "They're herding." Mara's rifle barrel dipped slightly. Toward what? The answer came from the ruins of the fissure. A sound like wet stones grinding together echoed from the collapsed earth, followed by a tremor that sent pinecones rolling toward the gaping hole. The creature's heads snapped toward it in unison, their two long fingers twitching. The largest one exhaled that hollow log note again, lower this time, almost reverent. Vic wiped his knife blade on his thigh, leaving a streak of black. "Something's coming up," he growled. The tremor deepened into a full-bodied shudder, the forest floor undulating like a living thing. The fissure's collapsed edges crumbled inward, dirt and pine needles sliding into the darkness with a sound like sand through an hourglass. Dr. Poe grabbed Jake's arm, her nails biting through his sleeve. "That's not something," she whispered. "That's a threshold." The creatures began to kneel. Not in submission. Their postures were too rigid, too ritualistic. The largest one pressed its elongated fingers into the soil, palms up, as if offering tribute. The others mirrored it, their clicking synchronized into a metronomic pulse. Vic's knife hand twitched, his pupils dilating unnaturally wide. The black ooze from his neck wounds had begun to spiderweb beneath his skin, veins darkening like ink in water. The ground split with a wet pop. Not another fissure. This was a rupture, jagged and star-shaped, radiating from the collapsed maw. From its center a shape emerged. First a single jointless finger, then a forearm sheathed in something that wasn't skin, too glossy, too fluid, reflecting the fading light like oil. Mara's rifle snapped up, but I caught the barrel before she could fire. "Wait," I breathed. The thing's wrist breached the earth, then its elbow, moving with the languid inevitability of a rising tide. Jake's breath hitched. "That's a hand," he muttered. "A human," the words died as the fingers flexed, revealing webbing between each digit translucent and veined with black. The largest creature crooned, its hollow log voice layering with the others into a discordant hymn. The hand's fingers twisted, bones audibly relocating, and suddenly it wasn't human at all. It was something with too many knuckles, too many planes, folding and unfolding like origami in reverse. The hand's fingers unfolded, each joint splitting like a matryoshka doll, revealing another limb beneath. The creature's hymn swelled, their voices warping into something between a choir and a swarm of cicadas. Dr. Poe's vial slipped from her fingers, shattering at her feet. The citrus scent barely masked the new stench rising from the rupture, old blood and spoiled honey. Vic took a half step back, his knife arm shaking. The black veins spiderwebbing his neck pulsed in time with the hymn. "We need to move," he gritted out, but his legs didn't obey. Mara's rifle stayed raised, her aim wavering between the kneeling creatures and the thing emerging from the earth. Its forearm now gleamed under a sheath of iridescent mucus, the webbed fingers flexing in a pattern too deliberate to be random. Asterisk symbols asterisk, I realized, carving something into the air. Jake's boot scuffed the dirt. "It's learning," he whispered, horrified. The hand paused mid-gesture as if hearing him. Then it twisted, palm up, and the rupture exhaled a gust of air so cold it frosted Dr. Poe's goggles. The creatures keened, their hymn hitting a crescendo that made my molars ache. Elias, still pressed against the boulder, suddenly lurched forward like a marionette yanked by its strings. His mouth opened, not to scream, but to hum, perfectly matching the creature's pitch. Vic grabbed his collar, hauling him back, but Elias' limbs kept moving, jerking in time with the hand's motions. His eyes rolled back, showing only whites. Elias' humming synced with the hymn, not mimicking, but harmonizing, his vocal cords vibrating at a frequency no human throat should produce. Vic's grip on his collar slipped as Elias' skin rippled beneath his fingers, the texture shifting to something slick and pliable. Dr. Poe lunged, slapping a citrus-soaked glove over Elias' mouth. The humming stuttered into a wet gag, his convulsions spraying black fluid across her faceplate. The hand in the rupture jerked, fingers splaying wide. The creature's hymn fractured into dissonant shrieks. The largest one vaulted forward, its elongated fingers closing around Elias' ankle with a sound like suction cups latching onto flesh. Mara's rifle barked, once, twice, the rounds punching through the creature's wrist. Ichor geysered, but its grip held. Elias' legs stretched, the fabric of his pants splitting as his femur visibly elongated, the kneecap relocating with a wet pop. "Acid!" Dr. Poe screamed, clawing at her pack. Jake was already moving, dumping the last of his lime mixture onto Elias' distorted leg. The flesh hissed, recoiling like burned rubber, but the creature didn't release its hold. Its jaws unhinged, vomiting a stream of black fluid onto Jake's chest. He staggered back, his shirt dissolving instantly, the residue eating into his skin in branching, fractal patterns. Vic's knife flashed, severing the creature's arm at the elbow. The disembodied fingers twitched, still fused to Elias' leg. The rupture convulsed, the hand within retracting momentarily, then surged upward, revealing a forearm now studded with eyeballs, their pupils dilating in unison. The largest creature wailed, clutching its stump, and the hymn resumed, louder, angrier, the sound waves making the pine needles quiver like struck tuning forks. Elias' scream tore through the hymn, his vocal cords shredding into something wet and guttural. His stretched leg convulsed, tendons snapping like overtuned strings. Dr. Poe jammed another citrus vial into the creature's severed arm stump, twisting it deep. The flesh sizzled, black veins recoiling, but the fingers remained fused, their grip tightening as Elias' kneecap split down the middle with a sound like a green branch breaking. The hand in the rupture pulsed, its many eyes rolling toward Jake, who was on his knees now, clawing at his chest where the black residue branched toward his throat. His breaths came in whistling gasps, each exhale frosted in the suddenly arctic air. Mara pivoted, firing into the rupture. The rounds punched into the forearm's slick surface and stuck there, embedded like flies in amber. The eyes blinked lazily, ichor oozing around the bullets as if they were mere irritants. Vic staggered, his own black-veined arm twitching uncontrollably. He grabbed Elias' belt with his free hand, heaving backward. Elias' femur snapped, the bone protruding through liquefying flesh. The creature's detached fingers finally loosened, sliding off with a sound like wet rubber peeling from glass. The hymn stuttered. The kneeling creatures tilted their heads in eerie unison, their clicking syncopation shifting tempo. The largest one rose, its stump dripping ichor, and took a step toward Vic, not attacking but examining, nostrils flaring at the black veins spidering up his neck. Its jaws parted, exhaling a breath that smelled of turned earth and copper. Vic's knife hand spasmed, the blade clattering to the ground. Vic's breath fogged in the sudden cold, his pupils blown wide as the creature leaned in close enough for its breath to ripple his collar. Its nostrils flared again, sniffing, and then it recoiled with a chittering hiss, as if repelled by whatever chemical changes were twisting through his bloodstream. The other creatures froze mid-movement, their clicking synchronization fracturing into discord. Jake's choking gasp broke the stalemate. He clawed at his throat, his fingertips coming away smeared with black ichor where the residue had branched across his windpipe. The hand in the rupture twitched, its finger eyes rolling toward him with predatory focus. Mara pivoted, her rifle stock slamming into the largest creature's temple with a crack that sent it sprawling. But the hymn didn't stop. It changed, the notes warping into something between a lullaby and a death rattle. Elias convulsed at our feet, his snapped leg twitching like a severed cable. The exposed bone darkened, the marrow bubbling with that same black ooze. Dr. Poe tore open another vial, pouring it directly into the wound. The reaction was instantaneous. His flesh screamed, the sound vibrating from his throat though his lips never moved. The ooze recoiled, retreating up his femur in branching rivulets. The rupture exhaled again, this time with enough force to send Pinecone skittering across the ground like kicked marbles. The hand within flexed, its webbed fingers stretching toward Jake, beckoning. Jake's body jerked in response, his limbs moving with marionette stiffness despite his panicked whimpers. Vic lunged, his black-veined arm hooking around Jake's waist, but the ground beneath them shivered, tendrils erupting to coil around Vic's ankles. Vic snarled, twisting his hips mid-fall to shield Jake with his body as the tendrils cinched tighter. His boots scraped furrows in the dirt, muscles straining against the unnatural pull. Mara's rifle cracked twice, once severing the tendrils around Vic's left ankle, once punching through the rupture's wrist in a spray of gelatinous fluid. The hand recoiled with a sound like tearing silk, its finger eyes rolling wildly before focusing on her with terrifying precision. Dr. Poe was already moving, her remaining vials clinking as she sprinted toward Jake. His convulsions worsened, jaw unhinging at an impossible angle as black tendrils slithered from his mouth. She skidded to her knees, upturning a vial of acetic acid into his gaping maw. The reaction was volcanic. Jake's torso jackknifed off the ground as the liquid hit, his scream distorting into something guttural and multi-toned. The rupture shrieked in unison, the hand flailing as if mirroring his agony. Elias' body chose that moment to twist. Not a seizure, a deliberate, boneless contortion that brought his ruined leg up and over his shoulder with a wet pop. His mouth unhinged like the creature's, vomiting a stream of black ooze directly onto Mara's back. She arched with a choked cry, her jacket dissolving instantly as the residue ate through to flesh. The smell of burning meat joined the symphony of decay. Vic finally wrenched free, his veins now entirely black beneath the skin, pupils blown so wide they swallowed the irises. He moved with unnatural speed, snatching his fallen knife and driving it into the largest creature's spine. The blade sank hilt-deep with a squelch, and stayed there when he released it, vibrating like a tuning fork. The creature didn't scream. It laughed, the sound harmonizing with the hymn still pouring from the rupture. The hymn fractured. The creature's synchronized movement stuttered like a broken film reel. Vic's knife pulsed where it protruded from the creature's spine, its vibrations matching the tremor beneath our boots, not random but rhythmic, counting down. The largest creature turned its head 180 degrees to stare at Vic, its sideways pupils dilating until they swallowed its eyes whole. Then it smiled with Jake's teeth. Dr. Poe tackled Vic just as the knife detonated. Shrapnel of blackened bone and gelatinous flesh peppered the trees. The creature didn't scream. It unraveled, limbs elongating into fibrous strands that whipped through the air like live wires. One lashed across Mara's cheek, flaying skin from bone in a single stroke. Her scream was swallowed by the hymn's crescendo as the rupture yawned wider, the hand within now fully emerged, attached to nothing, just a disembodied limb floating midair, its finger eyes rolling in ecstasy. Jake's convulsions reached a fever pitch, his spine arching until his heels touched the back of his skull. The black ooze branching across his skin hardened, forming a chitinous exoskeleton that cracked with each spasm. Dr. Poe lunged, dumping her last vial pure hydrochloric acid into the rupture. The earth howled. The hand recoiled, its fingers blistering before liquefying like wax under a blowtorch. The hymn dissolved into static. Silence. The silence lasted 3 heartbeats. Then Elias' body twitched, not the jerky spasms of before, but a slow, deliberate curl of his fingers into the dirt. His broken leg made a wet click as the bones realigned beneath blackened flesh. Mara's breath hitched, her rifle trembling where it was still trained on the rupture. The largest creature's remains had dissolved into the soil, leaving only Vic's knife embedded in the earth, its blade now blackened and brittle. Dr. Poe was the first to move. She staggered to Jake's side, her gloves slick with his blood and the remnants of acid. His exoskeleton had cracked apart, revealing raw, weeping flesh beneath. His chest rose and fell in shallow, whistling gasps. "Pupils non-reactive," she murmured, peeling back an eyelid. Her voice wavered. But he's alive." Vic didn't respond. He stood motionless, his black-veined arms hanging limp at his sides. The puncture wounds on his neck had sealed over with a glossy obsidian sheen. When I reached for him, his skin was cold, not the chill of shock, but the deep, unnatural cold of something that had never been warm to begin with. His head turned toward me slowly, pupils swallowing the last traces of blue. "Run," he rasped. The word wasn't a warning, it was an echo. The rupture gurgled. The hand, what remained of it, had retracted into the earth, but the edges of the fissure pulsed faintly like a dying neon sign. The other creatures were gone, vanished into the trees with their hymn still humming in the wind. Only their gifts remained: Elia's twitching limbs, Jake's fractured breathing, Vic's hollow stare. The rupture exhaled one final, rattling breath, then sealed with a sound like a zipper closing on wet fabric. The forest air snapped back into focus, the spoiled meat stench replaced by pine and the sharp tang of spilled acid. Mara's rifle clattered to the ground as she clutched her flayed cheek, blood welling between her fingers. "They're not done," she whispered. Elia's fingers dug deeper into the soil, his broken leg now fused at an unnatural angle, the bone visible through glossy black tissue. His head lolled toward us, mouth slack, but the voice that emerged wasn't his. It was layered, discordant, the creature's hymn distilled into a single phrase. Threshold crossed. Dr. Poe pressed her palm to Jake's chest, his breathing shallow but steady. The exoskeletal shards had melted into his skin, leaving raised, branching scars. "His vitals are stabilizing," she said, though her eyes flicked to Vic's motionless form. "But whatever's in him, it's spreading." Vic's head twitched at the sound of her voice. His obsidian-sheathed neck cracked as he turned to face her, his pupils expanding until his eyes were pools of black. When he spoke, his voice was wrong, too many tones, too many echoes. "Skin. Hunger." Mara's hand hovered over her sidearm, her fingers trembling against the grip. Vic whatever Vic had become tilted his head as if studying the gesture, his blackened lips peeling back to reveal teeth that were too sharp, too many. The air between us thickened with the scent of ozone and something metallic, like old blood on copper wire. Jake gasped suddenly, his back arching off the ground. The branching scars across his chest pulsed with a dull, bioluminescent glow, veins mapping his skin in intricate black pathways. Dr. Poe pressed a gloved hand to his forehead, then recoiled. "He's cold," she whispered. "Not hypothermic, empty cold." Elias' body twitched again, his fused leg scraping against the dirt with a sound like sandpaper on glass. His mouth unhinged, wider than humanly possible, and the hymn spilled out, not layered this time, but singular, focused, the notes vibrating in my sternum like a struck gong. The trees shuddered in response, pine needles raining down in silent submission. Vic took a step forward. His boots left no prints. The first pinecone hit my boot with a hollow talk, then another, and another, falling in perfect rhythm, like metronome beats counting down. Mara's bloodied fingers twitched toward her sidearm, but Vic's black hole eyes locked onto the movement. His head cocked to the side with a wet pop of vertebrae realigning. Dr. Poe's breath fogged in the sudden chill as she pressed two fingers to Jake's carotid. "Pulse 38 BPM, she murmured. "Respiration, 4 per minute." The bioluminescent veins beneath his skin pulsed slower now, syncing with the pinecone cadence. Elias' hymn cut off mid-note. His jaw unhinged silently, tendons stretching like rubber bands, as the blackened tissue of his leg began to bubble. The fissure scars along Jake's chest mimicked the motion, flesh rippling in unison. Mara's sidearm cleared its holster, but Vic was faster. A blur of obsidian-sheathed limbs, his hand clamped over hers with a sound like wet cement setting. "Don't," he rasped. The word dripped with that layered echo, but beneath it, buried deep, a frayed thread of Vic. Mara's breath hitched as Vic's grip tightened, not enough to break bones, but enough to make the tendons in her wrists scream. His fingers were wrong now, the knuckles too numerous, the skin beneath the black sheen splitting in hairline cracks that seeped a thick, honey-colored fluid. The sidearm trembled between them, its barrel drifting toward Elia's twitching form. Dr. Poe edged backward, her boots crunching on frozen pine needles. "Vic," she said, slow and deliberate like speaking to a spooked horse. "You're still in there, fight it." Vic's head swiveled toward her, the motion too fluid, too unhinged. His pupils pulsed, black swallowing the last remnants of white. For a heartbeat his grip slackened, just enough for Mara to wrench her hand free. The sidearm clattered to the ground between them, its slide glistening with that same honeyed seep. The forest held its breath. The pinecone cadence stuttered. Elia's bubbling leg erupted in a geyser of black ichor, the force knocking Dr. Poe onto her back. The fluid arced upward, then hung there, defying gravity, forming a perfect inverted teardrop that reflected our frozen expressions in its oily surface. Vic's head snapped toward it, his neck creaking like old timber. The droplet pulsed, elongating into a needle-thin strand that connected with Jake's branching scars. His back arched violently, mouth gaping in a soundless scream as the scars lit up, pulsing in time with the hovering ichor. Mara lunged for the sidearm. Vic moved faster but not toward her. His black-sheathed hand slashed through the ichor strand like a knife through spider silk. The severed ends writhed, splattering across the pine needles with a sound like frying bacon. Jake collapsed, gasping, his scar glow dimming to embers. The hovering ichor recoiled, contracting into a sphere that rotated slowly, its surface reflecting not the trees or sky but memories, flashes of the ranger station, the fissure, Elia's leg snapping. Vic made a sound halfway between a growl and a whimper, his obsidian fingers twitching toward the sphere. The sphere pulsed once, twice, then flattened into a perfect disk suspended like a coin on its edge. The images sharpened, Vic's knife plunging into the creature's spine, Elia's femur snapping, Jake's chest blooming with black veins. But there were new frames now, ones that hadn't happened yet. A figure with Vic's silhouette standing at the edge of a cliff, his shadow stretching too long. Mara's rifle firing into a writhing mass of limbs. Dr. Poe's goggles reflecting a sky that wasn't sky. Vic staggered back as if struck. The obsidian sheen on his skin rippled, cracks spiderwebbing from his collarbone to his jaw. From the fractures seeped not blood, but that same honeyed fluid, thick and slow as tree sap. The disc rotated faster, its edges fraying into tendrils that quested toward him. One brushed his wrist, and burned, the contact leaving a smoldering groove in his obsidian flesh. Mara snatched the sidearm. She didn't aim at Vic, she aimed at the disc. The bullet punched through its center with a twang like a snapped guitar string. The disc shattered, fragments exploding outward in a starburst of liquid metal. Each shard screamed, a high-pitched wail that harmonized with Elia's silent hymn. The largest piece arced toward Dr. Poe. The shard struck Dr. Poe's goggles with a crystalline ping, embedding itself in the left lens like a bullet frozen mid-penetration. She didn't flinch, just stared through the fractured polycarbonate as the shard's edges bloomed, filament-thin tendrils weaving through the cracks like roots seeking water. The wailing pitch climbed, vibrating her jaw until her teeth ached. Vic moved. A black blur, his obsidian hand closed around the goggle frame and yanked. The shard came free with a sound like Velcro tearing, its tendrils stretching until they snapped, recoiling into the metal with a hiss. He hurled it into the trees, where it embedded itself in a pine trunk and kept digging, boring deeper with a grinding whine. The forest exhaled. Elia's hymn cut off mid-note, his body going limp as a gutted fish. Jake's scars dimmed to faint silver traceries, his breathing shallow but even. Only Vic remained changed, his obsidian skin cracking further with each movement, honeyed fluid welling in the fissures. He turned his hand over, studying the grooves the disc tendrils had burned into his palm. When he spoke, his voice was a radio tuned between stations. "Mine now." The pine needles beneath Mara's knees had frozen into brittle shards, snapping like glass as she shifted her weight. Her sidearm trembled in her grip, not from fear, but from the cold seeping up through the earth, gnawing at her bones. Vic's shadow stretched too long in the fading light, his obsidian fingers curling and uncurling as if testing unfamiliar joints. Dr. Poe ripped off her compromised goggles. The left lens was webbed with fine fractures, the polycarbonate etched where the shard had burrowed. She blinked at Vic, her pupils dilated not with fear but with a dawning, horrified understanding. "It's not just in them," she whispered. "It's in the air." Jake's chest rose in a shuddering inhale. The silver scars pulsed once, a delayed echo of the shattered disk's rhythm, then darkened again. His eyelids fluttered, revealing irises filmed with a gossamer sheen like oil on water. When his lips parted, the voice wasn't his. "Threshold, threshold, threshold." Elias' body spasmed in sync with each repetition, his fused leg twisting grotesquely. The blackened tissue had begun to peel, revealing glistening muscle beneath, not human, but segmented, insectal. Vic's head snapped toward him, his neck vertebrae popping like a string of firecrackers. The honeyed fluid oozing from his cracks thickened, dripping onto the pine needles with a sound like hot wax hitting water. The honeyed droplets hit the frozen pine needles and sparked, tiny blue flames licking up from each impact point. Vic stared at his own dripping hand like it belonged to someone else, like it was a tool he'd found in the woods and didn't know how to use. The flames spread in perfect concentric circles, not consuming the needles, just hovering atop them in flickering halos. Dr. Poe's breath fogged violently as the temperature plunged again. Her exposed eye, the one not covered by the broken goggle lens, watered instantly, the tear freezing halfway down her cheek. "It's mapping," she whispered. The flames pulsed in response, their halos expanding to outline a sprawling, geometric pattern none of us could quite focus on, angles too sharp, curves too perfect. Jake's scarred chest hitched. His oil-slick irises rolled back, showing white for half a second before snapping forward again, locked onto Vic. His lips parted. "You carry the key now." The words came out warped, his vocal cords buzzing like a wasp trapped in a jar. Elias' peeling flesh made a sound like cellophane crumpling. His insectal muscles flexed beneath the shedding tissue, each segment glistening with a thin membrane of black fluid. He wasn't breathing, just twitching, each spasm perfectly timed to Jake's wheezing exhales. The blue flames pulsed in perfect sync with Jake's scar glow, their heatless light casting long shadows that didn't quite match the tree's actual positions. Vic's obsidian fingers flexed, honeyed fluid dripping onto the geometric fire pattern, each drop expanding the design outward in fractal branches. One landed on Elias' exposed insectal muscle, and the flesh sizzled, contracting like cooked shrimp. Mara's sidearm wavered between targets Vic, Jake, Elias, before Dr. Poe caught her wrist. "Don't," she murmured, her frozen tear eye reflecting the impossible angles of the fire pattern. "The geometry is defensive. Look." The flames had formed a perfect hexagon around Vic, its lines crackling with static electricity. Where Elias' twitching limbs crossed the boundary, blackened tissue slewed off in wet chunks. Vic took a shuddering step forward, his boots leaving charred footprints in the pine needles. The honeyed fluid dripping from his cracks now moved with purpose, beating up and rolling toward Jake like mercury on a tilted plate. Jake's oil-slick eyes tracked the approaching droplets. His scarred chest hitched. "Keyholder," he rasped, then convulsed as the first bead touched his silver tracery. The scar absorbed it, luminescing brighter, the branching patterns rearranging into something suspiciously like circuitry. The circuitry scars pulsed once, a blinding flash that etched the pattern onto my retinas, then dimmed to a dull, steady glow. Jake's convulsions ceased abruptly, his body going rigid as a corpse in rigor. Only his lips moved, whispering something that sounded like "conduit online" before his jaw locked with an audible click. Vic staggered forward another step, his obsidian skin flaking away in jagged shards where the hexagon flames licked at his ankles. The honeyed fluid now flowed in rivulets down his arms, pooling in his palms before dripping toward Jake in an unbroken stream. The scent of burning pine gave way to something sharper, like ozone and overheated wiring. Mara's grip on the sidearm tightened. "We have to break the connection," she hissed, but Dr. Poe shook her head, her fractured goggles reflecting the crawling scar circuitry now spreading up Jake's neck. "Too late," Poe murmured. "It's not just in him anymore." She pointed to the trees, where the blue flames had leapt from the hexagon to the pine boughs, tracing the same geometric patterns in the bark. The wood groaned as it warped, planing itself into smooth, angular facets no tree had ever grown naturally. The pine boughs groaned louder, their newly formed angles twisting with the sound of green wood splintering under torsion. Vic's head snapped toward the noise, his obsidian neck cracking like an ice sheet shifting. Too many fractures, too many moving parts. The honeyed fluid now flowed upward, defying gravity, creeping along his jawline toward his ears in delicate branching patterns that mirrored Jake's scars. Jake's locked jaw suddenly unhinged with a wet pop, his mouth stretching wider than humanly possible. A single drop of black fluid oozed from his lower lip, hovering, then streaked toward Vic's outstretched hand like a bullet. It struck his palm and splashed, spreading into a perfect, shimmering circle that reflected nothing but static. Mara's finger twitched against the sidearm's trigger. "Vic." The static circle pulsed. Vic's head whipped backward so violently I heard vertebrae grind. His mouth opened not to speak, but to project, the sound that tore out of him layered with Jake's synthesized whisper and Elia's insectal buzzing. Reconfiguration required. The static circle pulsed again, expanding into a shimmering disk that hovered between Vic and Jake like a corrupted mirror. Vic's jaw remained unhinged, his vocal cords vibrating with that layered command. Reconfiguration required, as the disk's surface rippled, revealing not reflections but blueprints. Fractal diagrams of bone and sinew, of trees splitting into perfect geometric facets, of the canyon itself folding inward like origami. Dr. Poe's frozen tear finally cracked down the middle, splitting her cheek with a hairline fracture of frostbite. She didn't wipe it away. Her gaze stayed locked on the disk, where the schematics shifted to show them. Mara's spine reforged with segmented cartilage, Poe's optic nerve branching into silver filaments, Jake's ribcage unfolding like a puzzle box. Mara's sidearm clicked, safety off, but the sound was swallowed by the disk's next pulse. The static hardened into something physical, a wire-frame lattice that pushed outward, warping the air like heat haze. Where it passed over Vic's obsidian skin, the cracks resealed. Where it touched Jake's scars, the circuitry glowed hotter, melting his shirt to his chest in smoking threads. Elia's body chose that moment to unfold. Elia's unfolded like origami in reverse. First the grotesquely stretched leg snapping back into alignment with a wet pop, then his torso arching upward as if pulled by invisible strings, his arms splaying outward in perfect 90-degree angles. The blackened flesh slewed off in sheets, revealing chitinous plating that gleamed like polished onyx. His jaw unhinged wider, until his entire head split down the middle with a sound like tearing canvas, the halves peeling back to expose a writhing nest of translucent tendrils. The disc pulsed a third time, its wireframe lattice solidifying into a grid of humming blue light that tethered itself to Elia's new form. Tendrils lashed out, connecting to Vic's honeyed fingertips, to Jake's circuitry scars, to the geometric flames still tracing patterns in the pine boughs above. The forest held its breath. The air tasted of ozone and overclocked machinery. Dr. Poe's frozen tear fracture split further, a thin line of frostbite creeping toward her ear. She didn't blink. "It's not rebuilding them," she whispered. "It's debugging." Vic's head jerked upright, his obsidian eyes reflecting the disk schematics as they rearranged in real time. Elia's insectal limbs recalculating joint density, Jake's ribcage optimizing airflow, the trees recoding their cellular structure. The disc emitted a high-pitched ping, and Vic's mouth moved in unison with it. Optimization AT 87%. Prepare 4 final syntax. The disk schematics flickered once, then inverted, the wireframe lattice collapsing inward like a dying star. Vic's outstretched arm convulsed, the honeyed fluid reversing its flow, crawling back up his veins toward his shoulder with a sound like rewind tape hissing. Elia's split-head tendrils recoiled, retracting into his skull with wet snaps as the chitin plating sealed over them seamlessly. Jake gasped, a raw, human sound, as his circuitry scars dimmed to faint silver traceries. The sidearm slipped from Mara's fingers, landing muzzle first in the frozen earth. The barrel sank effortlessly, as if the ground had turned to liquid mercury beneath it. Dr. Poe exhaled sharply through her nose, the sound whistling past her frostbitten cheek. "Syntax error," she murmured. The disk pulsed weakly in agreement, its surface fracturing into pixelated static. Vic's obsidian skin began to peel, flaking away in jagged shards that dissolved before they hit the ground. Beneath, his own flesh was still there, pale and scarred and unmistakably human, but threaded through with luminous honey-colored veins that pulsed in time with the dying disk. His lips moved, forming words that carried no echo, no distortion. "It's done." The disk shattered with a sound like glass hitting concrete from a great height. The pieces didn't fall. They unfolded, each fragment blossoming into a tiny wireframe replica of the canyon, before dissolving into blue static. The last to go was the central shard, which hovered for a heartbeat between Vic and Jake, showing one final schematic. A human heart, its ventricles rearranged into a perfect fractal. Then it too winked out, leaving only the scent of burnt copper and the memory of a scream none of them had voiced. Elia's body collapsed like a marionette with cut strings. The chitin plating retracted with a series of wet clicks, leaving behind raw pink skin stretched too tight over his bones. His leg, once fused at that impossible angle, now lay straight, though the knee joint bulged unnaturally as if something inside had been packed in wrong. He didn't stir, but his chest rose and fell in shallow, rhythmic hitches. Alive. Somehow. Jake's circuitry scars faded to thin white lines, barely visible against his skin. His oil-slick irises cleared by degrees, the film receding like tidewater until his pupils contracted in the fading light. He blinked once, slow and dazed, before his gaze locked onto Vic. "You stopped it," he rasped. Not a question. A revelation. Vic flexed his fingers, normal fingers, though the nails were blackened and the knuckles too pronounced. The honeyed veins beneath his skin pulsed once, then dimmed to near invisibility. When he spoke, his voice was scraped raw but unmistakably his own. "No, we just paused it." Dr. Poe's frostbitten cheek had stopped spreading, the fractured line halting just below her ear. She touched it absently, her glove coming away with a dusting of ice crystals. "The syntax error," she murmured. "It wasn't rejecting the code, it was waiting for." Her gaze flicked to the trees where the geometric flames had faded to embers, their patterns still etched into the bark. For permission. Mara retrieved her sidearm from the mercury-soft earth. The barrel gleamed unnaturally clean, as if the metal had been scoured at a molecular level. She didn't holster it, just held it loosely at her side, her other hand pressed to her flayed cheek. The wound had stopped bleeding, but the edges were too precise, the exposed muscle too smooth, like a surgical demonstration. "So what now?" she asked, her voice steadier than it had any right to be. The forest answered before Vic could. A pinecone dropped, just one, landing between them with a soft talk. Then another a few feet to the left. Then another. Not in rhythm this time, but random. Natural. Overhead, the branches swayed in a wind that smelled of resin and damp earth, the last traces of ozone dissipating like morning fog. Jake sat up slowly, his fingers tracing the white lines on his chest. "They didn't glow anymore, but they itched," he said, "like healing mosquito bites." His voice was his own again, though his words came out haltingly as if he'd forgotten how to shape them. "It's still in us," he whispered. "Just dormant. Vic flexed his blackened knuckles. The honeyed veins beneath his skin had faded to near invisibility, but when the light hit them just right, they pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat seen through thin paper. "It's in everything," he corrected quietly. He nodded toward Elia's unconscious form, the too tight skin, the misaligned knee. "We're just the ones who got rewritten." Dr. Poe's frozen tear fracture cracked audibly as she clenched her jaw. "Then we leave," she said, decisive. Now, before it, she cut herself off, shaking her head. There was no word for what it might do next. The forest had other ideas. A pinecone struck Mara's boot, harder than before, deliberate. Then another hitting Vic's shoulder with a hollow thunk. They rolled to a stop in perfect alignment, forming a straight line pointing deeper into Devil's Maw. The trees groaned in unison, their geometrically carved facets shimmering with residual energy. Jake stood on shaky legs, his fingers still tracing the white scars. "It's not done with us," he murmured. His voice hitched not with fear but with something worse, recognition. "We're part of the pattern now." Vic exhaled through his nose, slow and measured. The honeyed veins flared briefly under his collarbone. He didn't argue, just bent to haul Elias over his shoulders in a fireman's carry, the unconscious man's misaligned knee dangling grotesquely. "Then we walk the line," he said, simple, resigned. They followed the pinecone trail in single file, Mara leading with her unnaturally clean sidearm, Dr. Poe limping behind with her frostbitten cheek glistening. The trees leaned inward as they passed, their faceted bark reflecting distorted glimpses of the group. Vic's shadow stretching too long, Jake's scars glowing faintly in the dusk, Elias' limp form twitching at irregular intervals. The canyon narrowed. The air thickened. The pinecone stopped abruptly at the edge of a clearing where the earth dipped into a perfect circle of bare dirt. No grass, no rocks, just smooth-packed soil like the floor of an ancient arena. At its center stood a single pinecone, balanced precariously on its tip. Dr. Poe's breath fogged violently. "It's a locust point," she whispered. The frostbite had crept to her earlobe now, tiny ice crystals forming in her hairline. "Where the rules change." Vic lowered Elias gently onto the dirt. The unconscious man's chest hitched twice, then his eyes snapped open. Not human eyes, not anymore. The pupils had split into perfect hexagons, their facets reflecting the darkening sky in kaleidoscope fragments. His mouth moved, but the voice wasn't his. It came from everywhere at once, the trees, the dirt, the honeyed veins beneath Vic's skin. Threshold acknowledged. The lone pinecone trembled. Its scales peeled back one by one with surgical precision, revealing not seeds but tiny geometric mirrors. Each no larger than a fingernail, each reflecting not the clearing but memories. Mara's gunshot echoing through the canyon, Elias' femur snapping, Jake's chest blooming with silver tracery. The images sharpened as the mirrors lifted into the air, forming a rotating constellation above the bare circle. Jake took an involuntary step forward. His circuitry scars pulsed once, a dull silver flare, before settling back into faint white lines. "It wants us to choose," he murmured. His fingers twitched toward the nearest mirror fragment, which showed Vic's obsidian hand severing the ichor strand. One memory to anchor it. Mara's grip tightened on her sidearm. The barrel gleamed unnaturally bright. "Anchor it where?" she demanded. Her flayed cheek muscle flexed, too smooth, too precise. The mirrors tinkled like wind chimes in response. Their reflections shifted, showing not the past now, but permutations. Vic standing at the canyon's edge, his shadow stretching into the abyss. Dr. Poe dissecting her own frostbitten cheek under a microscope. Jake's scars rearranging into a perfect Fibonacci sequence. Elia's hexagon eyes reflecting infinity. Dr. Poe exhaled sharply through her nose. Ice crystals formed in the air. "Not anchors," she corrected. "Variables." Her gloved hand hovered over the mirror showing Elia's snapped femur, then jerked back as the image morphed into something worse. Elia's bones unfolding like origami, each joint recalculated for inhuman flexibility. Vic knelt abruptly, his honeyed veins flaring amber beneath his skin. He pressed his blackened fingertips to the bare earth. "We're the syntax," he rasped. The ground yielded like wet clay beneath his touch, forming perfect concentric circles. "Our choices define the parameters." The pinecone at the center split open with a sound like cracking knuckles. From its core oozed a single drop of black fluid, identical to the ichor from Elia's leg but thicker, heavier. It hung suspended for a heartbeat before plunging into Vic's handprint. The earth absorbed it greedily, the concentric circles darkening to obsidian. Elias' body spasmed violently. His hexagon eyes rolled back, showing only the white. Then the white split, revealing another layer of hexagons beneath. His mouth unhinged silently, tendons stretching like taffy as his vocal cords vibrated with that layered voice. Convergence initiated. The mirror fragments overhead accelerated their rotation, their reflections blurring into a silver cyclone. Individual images became indistinguishable, except one. Mara's reflection remained crystal clear, her sidearm raised, her finger tightening on the trigger, the muzzle flash frozen mid-explosion. The mirror didn't show who she was shooting at. Dr. Poe's frostbitten cheek cracked audibly as she grimaced. "It's pruning timelines," she hissed, clutching her gloved hands to her chest. "Choosing which version of us gets to exist." Jake's circuitry scars pulsed silver once, twice, then stabilized into a steady glow. He reached toward the clearest mirror, the one showing Vic severing the ichor strand. His fingers passed through the reflection like dipping into water. "Then we choose this," he said firmly. "We choose the moment we fought back." The moment his fingertips connected with the mirror, Jake's scars ignited. The light raced up his arm in branching patterns, weaving through his veins like liquid lightning. He didn't scream, just shuddered violently, his pupils dilating until his eyes were pools of molten silver. Vic lunged forward, his honeyed veins flaring amber in warning. His blackened fingers wrapped around Jake's wrist and froze. The contact created a feedback loop between them, Vic's obsidian-tipped fingers conducting the silver energy, Jake's scars pulsing in sync with Vic's veins. Their combined silhouettes cast overlapping shadows that moved independently, stretching toward the remaining mirrors like ink spilled across paper. Mara didn't hesitate. She raised her sidearm, not at the mirrors, not at her teammates, but at the lone pinecone at the circle's center. The bullet struck true, punching through its geometric core with a sound like shattering stained glass. The pinecone unfolded violently, its scales peeling back to reveal a perfectly preserved human eyeball, its iris fractured into hexagonal segments. The eye blinked. Elia's spasming body suddenly stiffened. His multiple layers of hexagon pupils contracted to pinpricks. His voice, when it came, was no longer layered with the entity's distortion, just raw human agony. "Mara," he gasped. "Oh God, Mara." His misaligned knee twisted back into proper alignment with a sickening crunch. The mirrors overhead shattered in unison, raining glass shards that dissolved midair into silver mist. Jake and Vic collapsed forward as the feedback loop severed, their connecting lights snapping like a severed cable. Vic's honeyed veins dimmed instantly, retreating beneath his skin like frightened eels. Jake's scars faded back to thin white lines, though his fingers still twitched with residual energy. The earth at the circle's center began to breathe. The packed dirt rose and fell in slow, deliberate rhythms, exhaling the scent of pine resin and damp copper. Dr. Poe's frostbitten cheek thawed abruptly, the ice crystals melting into pink, unbroken skin. She touched it with trembling fingers. "It accepted the variable," she whispered. "We chose defiance. It chose adaptation." From the breathing earth sprouted a single sapling, impossibly fast, its trunk twisting upward as they watched. Its bark gleamed unnaturally smooth, polished to an obsidian sheen. Branches unfurled in precise geometric angles, each twig terminating in a single pinecone that pulsed faintly with inner light. One detached, landing in Vic's palm with deliberate gentleness. Inside the pinecone's core, a miniature mirror reflecting not their faces, but the ranger station where this had all begun. The team, whole and unmarked, receiving their briefing under flickering fluorescent lights. The image held for 3 perfect heartbeats before dissolving into the grain of the wood. Elias sat up, his hexagon eyes blinking rapidly. The facets melted away layer by layer until only his original brown irises remained, bloodshot but human. He coughed, a wet, ragged sound, and spat black ichor onto the dirt. "It's not gone," he rasped. "Just quieter." His fingers probed his knee, now perfectly aligned but threaded with fine silver scars beneath the skin. Jake flexed his hands, watching the white circuitry lines shimmer faintly when he moved too quickly. "We're carrying pieces of it," he said, not frightened, not relieved, just stating a fact. "Like antivirus patterns," Dr. Poe finished. She touched her thawed cheek, the skin seamless but oddly numb. Her gloves came away smudged with obsidian dust from the new sapling's bark. "We disrupted the full conversion. Now we're vaccines." The breathing earth stilled abruptly. The sapling's pulsing pinecones dimmed to a soft glow, their light synchronizing with Vic's amber veins when he stepped closer. He held the mirror pinecone carefully, turning it over in his blackened fingers. The reflection now showed only their current faces, exhausted, altered, but undeniably theirs. "It's a contract," he said quietly. "We walk out of here, we keep its patterns alive inside us, and in exchange—" Mara holstered her sidearm at last. The metal no longer gleamed unnaturally, just well-worn steel, though the grip had reshaped itself to match her palm perfectly. "In exchange, it learns," she said. Her flayed cheek had healed into a thin white scar, the muscle beneath moving naturally when she spoke. "Not just our flesh, our choices." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of fresh resin instead of copper. The geometrically carved trees at the clearing's edge creaked as their unnatural angles softened back into organic curves. One by one, their faceted bark slewed off in sheets, revealing ordinary pine beneath. The forest exhaled, not a sentient gesture, but the simple release of tension after a storm. Dr. Poe pocketed a sliver of the obsidian sapling's bark, her gloves sizzling faintly where it touched. "Evidence," she murmured when Mara arched an eyebrow. The biologist's gaze lingered on Elia's silver-threaded knee, Jake's faint circuitry scars, Vic's amber-lit veins. "For whoever comes next." Jake touched the mirror pinecone in Vic's hand. His fingertips left smudges of silver light that dissolved into the grain. "It showed us the station," he said quietly. "Is that where we're going back to, or—" His scars pulsed once dimly, as if reacting to the unspoken question, "Or are we something else now?" Elias stood without wobbling, his realigned knee bearing weight perfectly. Only the way his pupils briefly fractured into hexagons when he blinked betrayed the transformation. "We go back," he said firmly. "And when they ask," his voice hitched as the forest floor trembled faintly beneath them, the breathing earth settling into final silence, "we lie." Vic closed his fist around the pinecone. The mirror inside shattered with a sound like ice cracking underfoot. When he opened his hand, only obsidian dust remained, trickling through his fingers to stain the earth black. "We lie," he agreed. His honeyed veins dimmed to near invisibility beneath his skin. "Until it matters." They walked out of Devil's Maw in single file, the path clearer than it had been in weeks. No shifted trees, no unnatural silence, just the ordinary creak of branches and the distant call of a raven. The canyon walls behind them shimmered briefly, their striations rearranging into perfect geometric patterns before dissolving back into natural rock formations. A final adjustment, a completed equation. By the time they reached the ranger station, the only visible marks were Elias' limp, explained away as a sprain, Jake's fatigue, attributed to dehydration, and Poe's frost-nipped cheek, blamed on a faulty heater. The agents in black suits waiting at the door didn't ask about Vic's blackened knuckles or the way Mara's sidearm sat differently in its holster. They just handed each team member a sealed envelope stamped with a single word, CLEARED. Thank you for listening to tonight's stories. If you enjoyed them, please leave a like and subscribe.